Hello and welcome back to Life's Biggest Questions. I'm Ron Mackenzie Lafergie. Yig, otherwise known as the father of serpents, is one of Lovecraft's great old ones. First seen in The Curse of Yig, this snake-like being is known for his love and control over snakes of the world. But what if this freaky snake god was real? Let's explore. If you want more what if videos, check out our biggest what ifs playlist on the channel. Now get ready to get yiggy with it. It's time to ask the question, what if Yig was real? Yig was actually created by Cthylla Bishop, first appearing in The Curse of Yig, but it was changed a great deal when Lovecraft added it to the mythos. Little is said of Yig. Some stories say he closely resembles a man until you get too close, while other works depict Yig as looking much more like a snake. In all cases, however, Yig has a distinct love of snakes. Yig views snakes as its children, and much of its kindness and wrath is based on how various individuals treat snakes. Treat them well and Yig has your back, but treat snakes badly and you may feel the wrath of this great old one. Although Yig received relatively little attention in Lovecraft's work, he has found a good deal of popularity in recent years, often being chosen over greater beings when creating mythical games like Dungeons & Dragons. This is largely because he's more relatable to modern readers and gamers. Why? Well, Yig is rather different from many other Lovecraftian gods. While the others tend to be incomprehensible and mysterious, difficult to pin down, Yig seems very much like a god from the better-known pantheons. It seems like something you'd find in Egyptian mythology, rather than disturbing literature. In fact, within Yig's lore, it's stated that he may have been a prototype for the serpentine Mesoamerican deity Quetzalcoatl. This gives Yig a somewhat different feel, trading the mysterious dread of the unknown for the well-understood fear of snakes. It also allows us to look at more specific effects of Yig's existence. Lucky us. So how would the world be different if there was a snake god on the loose? Well, first and foremost, people would probably start being a heck of a lot nicer to snakes. Yig has been known to be easy to anger, and any act against a snake could be dealt with heavily. Once a few people were killed by snakes, they would probably start changing their ways. It's said that Yig will either send his snake minions after one who has angered him, or else turn the offender into a snake themselves to join his ranks. The idea of being attacked by snakes, or worse yet, turning into a snake slave, would likely be more than enough to make people terrified of harming a snake. This might eventually lead to humanity worshipping Yig. It's tough to believe in a vague, mysterious god that may or may not exist when there's a big snake thing running around chucking cobras at everyone it hates. This is something that Yig would likely be very much open to. Perhaps the world would not only avoid harming snakes, but would even raise them to a higher position, similar to cats in Egypt. They would likely become much more numerous, but as long as you stayed on Yig's good side, it likely wouldn't be a danger. However, other than the changes to how we treat snakes, there really wouldn't be much change. Yig is believed to be rather easy to please, so he may not bring with him a number of commandments. He probably wouldn't order us not to mix fabrics, when or with whom to have sex. He wouldn't even necessarily care about killing people. Just be excellent to snakes and party on, dude. Now, it should be noted that some interpretations see him requiring somewhat more from his followers, but it's possible that Yig would be less demanding when it comes to all of humanity. That said, it's possible that even accidental harm to snakes would be punished, and this would have some rather significant effects, particularly on transportation. Transportation would become much more stressful, particularly in more rural areas and off-road. If you accidentally ran over a snake in your car or bike, you may find yourself feeling the wrath of Yig. This would cause people to be more reluctant to travel in certain areas where snakes were more common, and would be even more difficult as the number of snakes rose and rose. Furthermore, it could be that Yig would cause animals that prey on snakes to go extinct, since they too would be killing his children. This would have a huge effect since many species of animals eat snakes, from bobcats to wolverines to the endlessly stoic honey badger. We might see a mass extinction of many animals we love, and that would be a tough pill to swallow. Interestingly, while past videos have largely involved humanity's fight against the old ones, it's unlikely that mankind would fight against Yig. First, Yig would be significantly smaller than Cthulhu or Yog-Sothoth, so it would be a smaller target. Furthermore, Yig tends to work more behind the scenes, making it harder to find him in the first place. Plus, given his abilities with snakes, it seems likely that anyone plotting against Yig would come to an unfortunate end before they manage to succeed, and he wouldn't even need to leave his home. So fighting the beast would largely be futile. And now we return to our question, what if Yig was real? Well, after an initial slaughter of people who didn't get the memo, there's a good chance that the rest of humanity would step in line and avoid harming snakes at all costs. It's possible, even likely, that a religion would form around Yig, although his commandments would likely be limited to the treatment of snakes. However, these new rules would cause people to be incredibly cautious when traveling, severely limiting man's mobility, and could even result in mass extinction of animals that preyed on snakes. So I, for one, am glad that Yig isn't real. But if he is, I welcome my snake overlords.
Hey guys, Jared Bronstein here, and welcome back to Life's Biggest Questions. Today we'll be talking about one of the great old ones. This thing is such a power entity, it's been dubbed the Unspeakable One, him who is not to be named, among other things, including Hastur. Now before we explore the question, what if Hastur was real, make sure to subscribe to our channel, click that bell to be notified of other videos, and share this video with a Lovecraft fan. We got some comment replies coming up at the end of this one as well, so be sure to stick around for that. Alright, so Hastur. Well, although many do believe Lovecraft created this monstrous god, if that's what we could define it as, he actually first appeared in the short story Haysha the Shepherd by Ambrose Bierce in 1893. Hastur was actually quite harmless in Bierce's short story. However, it seems Lovecraft took inspiration from this and turned Hastur into a much more menacing monster. Although only briefly mentioned in his work, Hastur is believed to have that of a cult following and a deep hatred for Cthulhu, his half-brother. So with this in mind, let's now explore what would happen if Hastur was indeed real. Being considered an elder god or great old one, Hastur would most definitely take over the world. With his cult-like following, I think it's safe to say Hastur would create an army of his own that would make things very simple for the human race. Follow the rules set out by the new ruler or emperor of the world, or perish. Now, it's unclear what Hastur's true intentions are. If we go by Lovecraft's version, it's also unclear what Hastur is. Is it a he? Or is it a place? Is it an object? Of course, the ambiguity of this creature is what makes it so compelling. But for this video, let's say Hastur is a godlike creature with evil intentions. So how would this affect our world as we know it? Again, it really depends what powers Hastur has. Can he control our minds, or does he infect a certain group of people who then worship him as a god and try to conform others or kill? I think that's a good route to go, so let's keep moving forward. With Hastur having an army or a cult-like following on Earth, it would really be a worldwide problem. Those with other religious beliefs would most likely argue the idea that there is a greater god out there. This would cause a divide among people more so than there already is. However, assuming the people who worship Hastur are less human than anyone else, it may bring the rest of the world together. The idea here is that those who worship Hastur would almost be possessed in a way. In Haysha the Shepherd, Hastur is literally a god of shepherds. This leads me to believe those who do follow his religion, or cult of sorts, would be just that. Sheep. And with this sheep or herd mentality, they would all follow the same rules and have the same goals. Now, of course, I'm not saying that his followers would legitimately be sheep. I'm saying they'd have that sheep herd mentality. In this case, it would be converting the rest of the world to embrace and praise the Great One, Hastur. Now, of course, these people wouldn't have a superpower of any kind. It'd be very similar to that of the Manson cult. However, these people, just like those who followed Charles Manson, could be quite violent and dangerous. Identical to that of a godlike figure, the presence of Hastur would really depend on those who believe and to what degree. Especially considering how open-ended the idea of Hastur is, there could be extremists and those who just somewhat believe in his presence. This too could cause an issue even between these two types of people. Would people be sacrificed in the name of Hastur, or would it be sheep instead? Again, completely open-ended and up for interpretation, depending on the beliefs of those who look to this thing as a newly founded god. There's no telling what behaviors or even ceremonies these people would carry out. My name is Hastur, I am god of all. There's also the idea of summoning, which brings us back to the sacrifice. At first, when someone were to stumble upon the remains of this ritual, it would certainly open an investigation of sorts. But at that point, it may be too late. If those who follow this godlike figure were able to summon him into the world, there's no saying how much destruction he could cause. Given the powers he has, that make him undefeatable. If the physical being of Hastur was summoned onto the earth, it would quite literally be a hell on earth for those who don't believe or worship, most likely leading to their death or forever worshipping a god they didn't originally believe in. It's safe to say it would be a day of reckoning. That is, of course, if the physical being was to be summoned onto earth. If not, and he was just a godlike figure that was never seen by anyone, this too could be quite costly. Not to say he has powers of sorts, but those who believe would of course need a walking god of sorts to lead their rituals or services. The way other religions have priests or rabbis, the cult of Hastur would certainly have a physical being be the leader on earth. This person may be the one holding this cult together, or simply just a figure in place of the real god that can easily be replaced once they die. Ultimately, there are many ways the world could be affected if Hastur was real. If he was a physical being, there's no doubt he would overtake the world and make everyone his slaves or kill them. However, if he was just an ambiguous being or a godlike type that were to be worshipped, it's very likely a cult following would be started, and those who worshipped may carry out various different rituals, summonings, and sacrifices to try to please their new god. Ultimately, it would just mean another religion would be introduced to society, and it wouldn't necessarily change the world as we know it, but what those that worship do may be questionable. People may be at risk of being attacked by those in this cult, which eventually would see the worshippers arrested and sentenced for their crimes. With all that being said, this could also quite possibly mean the likes of Cthulhu, among other godlike creatures, may also be real. If this were the case, well, there would be complete chaos on Earth. With these evil beings and figures ruling our world, going at war with each other, there's no way anyone would necessarily survive the massacre that would be the fight between these unearthly gods. Of course, there would also be cults praising these other gods, and it would just be a whole nightmare for everyone, really. Now, thankfully, this is all fiction. The works of H.P. Lovecraft will always be fan favorites and will live on until the end of time, but all in our minds, of course. That's what makes his work so intriguing to many. There's no real right or wrong. He left his stories so open-ended, it allows the mind to do what it does. Wander.
Hello and welcome back to Life's Biggest Questions. I'm Ron Mackenzie LaFergie. As you can tell from the title, it's time for another video exploring the Cthulhu mythos. Fans of the mythos may be aware of Cthugha, the fiery great old one, first introduced in the short story The House on Curwen Street. But what if he resided not in the pages of fiction, but in the real world? Let's explore. If you'd like to hear more wacky hypotheticals, check out our biggest What Ifs playlist on the channel. But for now, get ready, it's time to ask the question, what if Cthugha was real? As with many monsters from the Cthulhu mythos, little is actually known of Cthugha. Writers have a tendency to be super vague about their monsters and gods and whatnot, which makes for really compelling and suspenseful stories, but also difficult researching for me. However, I think we have enough to go on. I should note that Cthugha is not a creation of Lovecraft himself. This was an addition to the Cthulhu mythos by August Derleth, American writer and anthologist. I just want to make sure credit is given where credit is due. So what do we know about Cthugha? Well, he's an elemental spirit of fire, taking the form of a planet-sized ball of plasma. He's generally depicted as having a face, kind of like Ego the Living Planet from Marvel Comics, and feeds off the life force of living beings. It should be noted that in the mythos, Cthugha, like many other deities, is imprisoned by the elder gods. However, this video will assume that he found a way out and was able to affect the Earth. But how might he affect us? Well, for one, if there was a giant planet-sized ball of fire in the sky, chances are humanity would be a bit concerned. If he was around since the early days of humanity, early religions would all be based around him. Considering how many were based on the sun, which is decidedly non-sentient, it's pretty safe to say that an all-powerful ball of fire would set our passions ablaze. I regret nothing. The world would begin worshipping Cthugha, and those who didn't would soon be consumed by him. However, not all interactions with Cthugha would be so negative. See, as a great old one, Cthugha is a sworn enemy of the elder gods, who are kind of the good gods, at least from our perspective. However, unlike most great old ones, Cthugha is also an enemy of the outer gods. They include Azathoth, Shub-Niggurath, and Nyarlathotep, all of whom I've made a video about, and they are definitely not good gods. They're jerks. So since Cthugha is an enemy of the outer gods, if one of them were to attack the Earth, we might find ourselves with an unlikely ally. Kinda like when the humans team up with Godzilla to fight other monsters. This actually has precedent in the stories. In 1944's The Dweller of Darkness, cultists actually tried to summon Cthugha to fight off an avatar of Nyarlathotep. If you'd like to learn more about him, check out our video, What If Nyarlathotep Was Real? But all this means is that we might have backup should some other baddies come out of the woodwork, even if that backup does come with a side of fire vampires. Wait, fire vampires? Yes, fire vampires. If Cthugha is real, that means his servants and offspring are probably real as well. This means that we would also have to deal with the flame creatures of Cthugha, also known as the flame vampires, as well as their king regent, Tsathoggua, who may or may not be the offspring of Cthugha. It's unclear. These vampires are bright red beings of energy that sap the life energy from sentient creatures. They can suck out the essence and even the memories of their victims, which are then added to their collective consciousness. This would probably be the scariest part of the whole thing, since the flame vampires would be walking the earth. It might actually be kind of like living in a town controlled by the mob. You know they're there, you know they might hurt you, but as long as you remain loyal to Cthugha, they probably won't hurt you. Probably. However, it's possible that we could fight back against them. While guns don't really work against beings of energy, we might find a way to contain or disperse them, effectively killing them. However, this would be really tricky. The ability of the flame vampires to steal memories would make it even more difficult to fight back against Cthugha. If just one member of the resistance was killed by a fire vampire, their memories would join the hive mind, and the rest of the group would be found and killed as well. Plus, if humanity ever came close to inventing something that could kill the vampires, we would probably be stopped before many were killed. So unless we found a way to create an EMP of sorts that could take them all out, resistance would likely be futile. And now we return to our question, what if Cthugha was real? Well, if there was a giant sentient ball of fire in the sky, chances are we would be worshipping it before long. Those who followed the ways of Cthugha and gave proper sacrifices would be safe and could even benefit from its protection if other deities decided to attack. However, this life of servitude would not be for everyone, and many would try to fight back against Cthugha and his minions. Would they succeed? Probably not. But would they die in a blaze of glory? Heck, yes they would. Was that yet another terrible fire pun? Yup.
Hey guys, how's it going? Jared Bronstein here, and welcome back to Life's Biggest Questions. Today we'll be talking about the great Tsathoggua, an old one whose appearance, behavior, and all-around being depends on which version you're talking about. Before we get into it, make sure to subscribe, click the bell icon to never miss a video, and let me know in the comments below which Lovecraft creature is your favorite. And now let's dive into it and explore our world if we were fearing the great old one, Tsathoggua. There's the original written by Clark Ashton Smith, who describes Tsathoggua as the following. He was very squat and pot-bellied, his head was more like a monstrous toad than a deity, and his whole body was covered with an imitation of short fur, giving somehow a vague sensation of both the bat and the sloth. His sleepy eyelids were half lowered over his globular eyes. The tip of a queer tongue issued from his fat mouth. Smith's version was also referred to as sloth-like in the Seven Geeses, as explained in the following passage. You shall note Tsathoggua by his great girth and his bat-like furriness, and the look of a sleepy black toad, which he has eternally. He will rise not from his place, even in the ravening of hunger, but will wait in divine slothfulness for the sacrifice. Lovecraft's version is somewhat similar, however HP decided to move away from the sloth and bat-like references. More specifically, Lovecraft refers to Tsathoggua as a toad-like god who can morph or mold itself depending on its circumstances. Either way, if this old god did exist, one thing is for sure, it'd be quite powerful. However, it may not be as much of a danger to society as we'd like to think. The true form of Tsathoggua is incomprehensible to the human eye, but as previously mentioned, we perceived it as a giant toad-like creature with bat and sloth features as well. The only main difference between Lovecraft and Smith's version is the transformation and lack of sloth and bat-like appearances. Other than that, they're mostly the same entity. And as scary of a monster as it may be, it seems Tsathoggua laziness would be the reason we wouldn't have much to worry about. More specifically, Tsathoggua is apparently so lazy it won't go after victims. Instead, even if it's being starved to death, Tsathoggua will wait for a sacrifice so it doesn't need to get up. It may sound silly, but this is what we're dealing with here, guys. According to Tsathoggua history, it resides in the depths of Earth. More specifically, in Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos, Tsathoggua lives in Nikai, which is an underground cave beneath Oklahoma in the United States. But if this thing were living below Oklahoma, it's not like all the residents of the state would be in imminent danger. As previously mentioned, Tsathoggua is extremely lazy and will wait to get a sacrifice before it hunts for its own victims. So it wouldn't really take over the state, nor would it try to take over the entire country. Really, Tsathoggua being a real entity wouldn't affect us as much as we may think, aside from the fact that, of course, people may try to explore the dangerous land that Tsathoggua calls home, in which they'd most likely become his sacrifice. There's also the realistic possibility that we'd want to study this godlike creature. Where did it come from? Well, technically space, and it lived on Saturn at one point, so does that make this great old one an alien? Yes, depending who you ask. We'd certainly want to know more about Tsathoggua, and this could lead to many casualties and money wasted. With the presence of Tsathoggua, well, that must mean that the other great old ones, such as Cthulhu, would certainly exist in our world as well. This would most definitely be problematic, considering most of H.P. Lovecraft's work, if not all, revolves around these monstrous creatures that have godlike abilities. Put simply, if all of H.P. Lovecraft's creations, or at least monsters that he has incorporated into his magical world, were real, we would certainly be doomed. Specifically speaking on Tsathoggua, well, it appears that we're not in much danger. Tsathoggua is lazy and apparently quite slow. It lives in the depths of the earth that no one would be able to go to and survive. But it seems Tsathoggua being a part of our world inevitably means there are other godly creatures that we would certainly be no match for. All in all, we'd either end up slaves to some of these gods or dead. Not sure which fate I'd rather have, probably the latter. Hey guys, welcome back to another LBQ. I'm your host, Jared Bronstein, and today we'll be continuing to explore the Cthulhu mythos. Before we do though, a friendly reminder to subscribe, click that bell icon, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoy our Lovecraft related videos. Today we'll be talking about Cthylla, also known as the Secret One, the Secret Daughter, and the Kraken. Cthylla is the offspring of Cthulhu and Idya, and is possibly one of the most important beings in the Cthulhu mythos, at least according to Cthulhu. Created by Brian Lumley, Cthylla is expected to give birth to Cthulhu if it should ever be destroyed somehow, some way. Because of this, Cthylla is protected by Cthulhu's minions, ensuring his saving grace is always in a safe place out of harm's way. Appearing as a gigantic red-bodied octopus of sorts, with 6 eyes and wings, Cthylla definitely isn't the prettiest monster out there. We also can't forget to mention her 8 tentacles accompanied by tons of razor-sharp claws claws, each measuring at about 5 inches in length. Possibly her best feature is that Cthylla can shape her body similar to that of her father. She has the ability to enlarge her wings to help her fly, and could also add or subtract her arms, having up to as many as 12 at a time. However, being one of the newer characters in the Cthulhu mythos, Cthylla is definitely younger and not as powerful as some of the other great old ones we've previously covered. In fact, she's had her fair share of troubles. The Wilmarth Foundation launched a top-secret operation called Project X, where the main goal was to destroy Cthylla. Although the Foundation failed their attempt, using nuclear warfare, they were able to injure Cthylla, who managed to escape the attack. And as I'm sure you can imagine, upon being informed of the attack, Cthulhu got his revenge on everyone involved. Another instance of Cthylla's troubles is when she was captured by researchers thinking she was a new species of octopus. In hopes of creating other offsprings to study, the researchers artificially inseminated Cthylla, which happened in Tina L. Jen's short story In His Daughter's Darkling Womb. So unlike most of the Lovecraft inspired or created that we've covered in the past, if Cthylla was real, she may not be as dangerous as initially thought. However, that doesn't mean her existence would mean smooth sailing for the world. Here's why. Cthylla is believed to live somewhere on Earth, in Yi, which, if I'm pronouncing it wrong, my apologies. Lovecraft seemed to have a way with creating monsters and places that are quite literally impossible to say. Not to say that's the case with the place Cthylla resides, but unfortunately I could not find much information on it, so I'm hoping for the best. Anyways, this would mean that Cthylla is in fact somewhere on Earth, or possibly below the earth as Cthulhu is. Either way, Cthylla's existence would confirm a lot for us. It would confirm that Cthulhu is also real and living below the ocean floor, which also confirms that Cthulhu's minions and cult is also very real. I think you guys could figure out where I'm going with this one. Although it is very possible that an army would most likely be able to take down Cthylla, even if it meant using nuclear warfare, there are of course many repercussions to doing this. Aside from the fact that it would upset the great Cthulhu, who would certainly spread chaos among the world, it would also involve spreading a ton of nuclear waste. Although it may be the least of our concerns when there is a giant godly creature below the seafloor awakening to end life and human civilization as we know it, still, nukes are bad, guys. Okay. All kidding aside, if Cthylla were in fact real, as is usually the case with any Lovecraftian inspired or created monster, we'd be living in a pretty bad time. Not necessarily at the hands of Cthylla herself, but more so because her father, the great Cthulhu, would be in a death-like slumber awaiting the day to take over the earth. If you guys want a more in-depth explanation as to why Cthulhu's existence in the real world would be incredibly problematic, check out the video we did, What If Cthulhu Were Real? If you're a fan of any of H.P. Lovecraft's work, then you know exactly what you're in for. The way this guy created some of the scariest, sickest, most frightening, and sadistic monsters, if that's even what you refer to them as, really puts the SCP Foundation to shame. Now don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of SCPs, but comparing Lovecraft's work to the Foundation's, it's like comparing Michael Jordan to Steph Curry. They're both good, but only one of them's the GOAT. And of all the horrific beings and creatures that Lovecraft has created over the years, from the very well-known Cthulhu to the lesser-known yet just as terrifying Nyarlathotep, well, let's just say this video is going to be a fun one. Regardless of your Lovecraftian knowledge, one look at any of his monsters and you're bound to need a new pair of undies. Which brings us to today's questions. What if Nyarlathotep existed in 2021? One thing is for sure, it leads to a pretty world. Get it? Because everyone would be pooping their pants. Alright, let's get into it and smash the like button, guys. So what makes this thing or being or entity, whatever you want to call it, so different from the numerous other creations that Lovecraft has birthed? Well, as you may know, most of the outer gods are living somewhere far out in the universe among the stars. This includes Yog-Sothoth and Azathoth. There's also everyone's favorite, Cthulhu, who is known as one of the Great Old Ones, which are all in a deep slumber, only destroying mankind and the entire planet when they wake up. Nyarlathotep, however, walks among us in the disguise of a human being. And that in itself makes this question that much scarier. It's believed it actually has over 1,000 forms or manifestations, as they're referred to, all of which will drive anyone mad at just the sight. But the one form this thing takes on Earth is that of a human, which to no surprise, makes it incredibly hard to track. This of course also makes things much easier for Nyarlathotep to blend in with society, which in itself is problematic, regardless of which year we're living in. But what exactly is this thing's purpose? Well, unlike the other godly figures, it seems Nyarlathotep is actually the one who serves or takes care of business. With the other gods having cults do their deeds, Nyarlathotep appears to serve the cults and lead them in the absence of the other outer gods. Also being the servant of Azathoth, it seems Nyarlathotep isn't necessarily on the same level as the other gods, but potentially sits between the Outer Gods and Great Old Ones and the cult members, in a league of its own, right in the middle, or so it seems. But that doesn't mean Nyarlathotep doesn't have the power to completely erase the human race and planet off the face of the universe. Oh no, don't underestimate this thing. As previously mentioned, Nyarlathotep disguises itself as a human to walk the earth. It walks the walk and talks the talk, being one of the only beings in Lovecraft's universe to use human languages instead of the alien languages. Now, what makes Nyarlathotep so terrifying is that unlike the other godly figures who don't necessarily have a clear-cut plan or goal, Nyarlathotep does. Just pure manipulation and deceit. In fact, Nyarlathotep prefers to enjoy the madness and destruction over the death of certain things, which again appears to make it more sadistic than the others. So what if Nyarlathotep was real in 2021? Well, I can't say for sure that it would start destroying everything and everyone because we don't know for sure. It seems there is a common consensus that at some point, Nyarlathotep will put an end to the human race and Earth altogether, but when or if that happens is another question in itself. Aligning with the Outer Gods and being referred to as their, I quote, messenger, heart, and soul, as well as, I quote, the immemorial figure of deputy or messenger of hidden and terrible powers, I think it's a very safe bet to say that if this thing was real in 2021, then 2021 would probably go down as the worst year in the history of all time. I mean, what year can top this thing just coming to Earth and completely destroying everything? Now again, maybe that's not what happens. Maybe Nyarlathotep has plans to do something in the year 2050 or 2500. Just because Nyarlathotep would be real and walking among us doesn't necessarily mean it would start causing death and destruction right away. However, it is also quite possible that's exactly what it does, with goals to not only destroy the human race and Earth as a whole, but to make it as horrifying, painful, destructive, and just as mad as possible. It seems if Nyarlathotep were to have a goal, aside from serving the Outer Gods, or of course Azathoth, which is its main priority, it would simply be just to spread destruction and madness. What that means for us, unfortunately, isn't good. How Nyarlathotep would choose to spread his madness and destructive ways would be at its own discretion. Maybe it would recruit cult members to just go around doing awful things to people. And I'm not talking about throwing a pie in the face or, I don't know, like breaking into someone's car or house, but like real awful things. Like brutally attacking them. Have you guys ever heard about Charles Manson? Starting to sound a lot like he was the real life Nyarlathotep. I mean, for all we know, maybe this thing creates or even manifests itself as an airborne illness that becomes a pandemic, you know? Now that could be a bit of a stretch, but I mean, if you guys really think about how awful our world has been the last few years, I mean, between the fires in Australia, California, the Amazon, the pandemic, the social injustices going on worldwide, it seems like the last few years have been full of destruction and chaos. So maybe Nyarlathotep existed in 2020. Now, as always, guys, let us know your thoughts on this one in the comments down below. Do you think Nyarlathotep would end the world if it was around in 2021? Also, guys, give me a break. I'm sure you guys will see in the bloopers. I've been trying to say its name properly, so if I did say it wrong, I apologize. Give me a break. For now, let's plot out some comments from the video, top 10 newest SCPs in 2021. Abraham Lincoln said, quoting Lindsay in the video, "At this point, everything around us is probably an SCP. Me, calls airstrike over my entire house." Well, if you guys like COD, make sure to add my gamer tag on Warzone. It's, what is it? I don't even know what it is. My Activision tag, if you guys want to play. I mean, I do more Warzone than multiplayer. Multiplayer, you know, I'll destroy anybody, so you guys don't want to mess with me there, but Warzone we could all play together. John Smith said, day 7, I guess this is like the 7th day of them commenting this. What if a great white fought a giant squid? I'm going to say the great white would win. Even if the giant squid got the great white's face, like this, I want to say the great white would just chomp at it. I don't know. Some blood would get in the water and then more sharks would come and just pow, pow, Mike Tyson that bad boy. Fox Jake said, what if half of humanity were SCPs, but we didn't know it? So this is crazy, guys, but when I was a kid, and I'm talking like really, really young, I had a wild, I mean, I still have a wild imagination, but I legitimately thought at times, like, what if I am legitimately the only human being, and everyone around me, through my eyes, like, this is gonna sound crazy, through my eyes, it's almost like a lens that I'm, like, they're almost all disguised as humans. So to me, and like, I'm talking my brother, my parents, I'm talking everybody, but really, I'm the only human, and aliens have taken over and kind of are just like fooling me to make me think that like the world's normal, for lack of a better word, but aliens are really just like almost treating me like a Sims character to see how the human race used to interact. That's literally what I thought as a kid. Then I grew up and now I think that it's the government doing that. I'm just kidding, guys. All right, that's all for this one, guys. I've been your host, Jared Bronstein, and we'll see you guys soon. Nyarlathotep. How do you say it? Nyarlathotep. 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 I don't even know how I'm gonna end this one. Nyarlathotep, okay? Nyarlathotep. Is that how you say it? Nyarlathotep? Nyarlathotep. Nyarlathotep. Did I say it wrong? I'm just gonna go with it. Nyarlathotep. Okay. I don't care. I said it last time. Nyarlathotep. Nyarlathotep.